In October 1949, the Chinese people celebrated the victory of the Communist Party. The leader of the Communists and the hero of the revolution was Mao Zedong.
我们的思念是正义的，正义的思念是任何敌人也攻不破的。
For Mao and the Chinese Communist Party, taking power was just a first step. The real revolution was about to begin. In 1949, China lay devastated by decades of civil war and foreign invasion. The previous regime, corrupt and incompetent, had left the country bankrupt. People hoped the new communist government would bring unity and peace, pride and prosperity.
Everybody felt that the liberation in 1949 was an historic demarcation. Before that, it was the old society with many ugly things in it. After the communists came, most people were idealistic and they began to fight for the same cause, for a new China.
Mao and his colleagues had a vision of momentous change. They wanted to transform the lives of 1/4 of mankind and create a strong and modern industrial China. The communists forged a new political structure. They set up a network of party branches which reached down from the capital to every village in the country. At local levels, officials explained party programs.
Communism meant political equality for everybody. The people would be masters of the country. That was the propaganda. People would have enough to eat and wear. Poverty would be a thing of the past.
The reforms went far beyond economics, into personal relations.
Before liberation, women had to do whatever they were told. They had no rights. There were 3 obediences and 4 virtues. Obedience to father before marriage, to husband after marriage, and to your son after your husband died. You had no rights at all.
The government's first major legislation made women legally equal to men.
Marriages arranged by parents or matchmakers were stopped. Women could marry the men they loved. So they were very happy.
The communists organized people into work units, which provided employment, health care, housing, and education. Work units also gave the party direct control over people's lives.
Everyone belonged to a work unit. At first, people weren't comfortable with them, but gradually they got used to them.
In the countryside, the changes were just as profound. For centuries, most peasants had struggled to survive hardship and poverty. During the revolution, Mao had won peasant support with promises of a better life. Now he gave them land. Party officials told peasants to seize property from their landlords.
It was fierce. The whole village, hundreds of people, came beating drums. They dragged me to the meeting ground and wanted to beat me. I said, "Don't hit me. I know my family has exploited the people for generations. I'll give you my house, land, everything." After they discussed it, they labeled me an enlightened son of a landlord family. They let me keep my house, although there wasn't much left in it. But in fact, I did well. Many people died.
Officials encouraged peasants to humiliate and beat their landlords. Often, the violence went much further. Across China, hundreds of thousands of landlords were killed. Nearly half of all China's arable land was distributed to poor peasants.
Before land reform, we only had 3/4 of an acre of land. It was not enough to feed us all. During land reform, we got nearly 3 acres of land. Because we had more land, we could grow more. Gradually, our life became better.
Now it was the people who were the masters. They really liked that. Land and houses were taken from the landlords and given to them. People saw that they benefited, so they supported the Communist Party.
The leaders of the party were veteran revolutionaries who had worked with Mao for years. Second in authority was Liu Shaoqi. Zhou Enlai was foreign minister and then premier. Gaining in prominence was Deng Xiaoping. Zhou Enlai was the gifted administrator and the loyal servant who never challenged Mao. He had a human touch that made him both popular and respected. Liu Shaoqi was more reserved. He was an orthodox communist, a cautious economic planner, and a devoted father. Mao was married to Jiang Qing, a former movie actress. During the 1950s, she never appeared in public. Mao was the party visionary, a poet, and a romantic revolutionary for whom no theory was sacred. He was also an astute strategist. Mao believed that China needed strong international support, and within weeks of taking power in 1949, he visited Moscow. But Joseph Stalin was a difficult ally. For 3 days, he did not even acknowledge Mao's presence in Moscow. Finally, he gave the Chinese limited aid and agreed to a defense treaty. On his return to Beijing, Mao addressed his colleagues. Chief among the imperialists was America. The United States did not recognize Mao's government. Only months after this speech, the two sides would be at war in Korea. In June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. America was outraged and called for immediate action. The United Nations sent troops from 15 countries to defend South Korea. They were led by the American General Douglas MacArthur. After months of hard fighting, the UN forces pushed the North Korean army out of the south. In October, they reached the North Korean capital, Pyongyang.
The original orders that we gave MacArthur were, when he is able to do so, to expel the North from the South. And in doing so, to keep well clear of the Chinese borders, because we did not want to give them any pretext to come in.
But MacArthur's troops continued north, towards the Yalu River and the border with China.
MacArthur had much broader objectives: to take advantage of the attack, to attack China, and remove Chinese communists as a threat in the area. And he is continually trying to do things that would bring China into the war.
Mao's government was barely a year old and in the midst of radical reforms. It could hardly afford a war, but Mao felt the UN forces were an intolerable threat to China's security. Under the command of General Peng Dehuai, 250,000 Chinese troops secretly crossed into Korea. At the end of October 1950, they attacked, taking the UN forces completely by surprise. The UN troops soon fled in a massive retreat. In China, the government launched a propaganda campaign called Resist America and Aid Korea.
People donated money for planes and ammunition for the war effort. Every family gave.
We heard people saying how our soldiers were bravely fighting in the icy fields and how they were beating the Americans, carrying them away in their sleeping bags one by one. We were so moved that we all donated. One day I got my 2 weeks' salary. I gave it all.
By the spring of 1951, the war was a grim stalemate. Both sides were dug in around the 38th parallel, separating North and South Korea. While fighting continued, peace talks began. Finally, after 2 years, the talks produced an armistice.
The Korean War forced us to recognize, and the American people to recognize, that the new regime, the communist regime in China, was a fact of life with whom we were going to have to live.
In China, the war created great national pride. The Chinese army had suffered terribly, with nearly 1 million casualties. But it had fought to a standstill the armies of the strongest nations in the world. And the Resist America campaign proved how effectively Mao's government could mobilize the entire country. Now it began a series of smaller campaigns against people inside China, people Mao called enemies without guns.
应当在国律上这种开展一个反行贿、反偷税漏税、反盗取国家资财、反偷工减料的步骤。全国的一切爱国同胞不应当团结起来，战胜这些旧社会遗留下来的无德而斗争。
Party officials encouraged people to act as informers using special letterboxes. The Jiang family had one of many small businesses still operating in Wuhan.
My in-laws were capitalists. They were told to report all their property to the government. So they made an inventory of everything in the store. Later, there was a struggle meeting. The shop assistants tied up my mother-in-law because they didn't like her. They yelled at her. My brother-in-law got impatient and said, "We don't have anything more. You keep saying we have more, but we don't." Then they tied him up too, saying he had a bad attitude. What we used as our dinner table was actually a bench, this long. They told her to kneel on it. It's very hard to kneel on a bench like that. If you bend just a little, you fall. You have to stay very straight to kneel on it. They kept us there until 11 at night. They really couldn't get any more out of us.
Thousands were jailed or executed. People with money, with foreign connections, or with ties to the previous regime. With these campaigns, the communists crushed all potential political opposition. But the vast majority of people were not hurt by the campaigns. For many Chinese, life was improving.
我们有充分的信心，克服一切艰难困苦，将我国建设成为一个伟大的社会主义共和国。
In 1954, Mao asked Dr. Li Zhisui to be his doctor.
Mao was not like the rest of us. He had no sense of time. Day or night, 24 hours were the same to him. He worked whenever he wanted and slept whenever he wanted. He didn't have regular meetings once a week or once a month. Any leader who wanted his permission to make a decision would send him a note. After Mao read it, he would write his comments on it and send it back.
The leaders and their families lived in Zhongnanhai, a huge walled compound in the heart of Beijing. They spent their summers at the same beach resort, reserved for high officials.
Usually, the dance party started at 7 on Saturday evening. Mao would come at about 10. As soon as he entered, people would all stand and clap to welcome him. Then many girls would come and ask him to dance. He would sit for a while, then dance with them, one after another. Supposedly, the party was for all the leaders. Actually, it was for Mao himself. It was a recreational activity organized for him.
While the leaders danced to Western music, the strongest foreign influence in the mid-50s was Russian. With the help of Soviet advisors, Mao's government began dozens of huge industrial projects. This development and Soviet help had to be paid for. Mao looked to China's peasants to foot the bill. But traditional family farms could not produce enough to pay for industry. In 1953, the communists began to socialize agriculture. First, they encouraged families to pool their property in small farms called cooperatives.
When you explained clearly to people what it meant to till the land together, with people working together, we would have more manpower and we would be able to increase production and our life would become better. When people accepted this, a few families started working together.
After the cooperative was set up, our life was much better. We could afford to raise pigs. Before, we didn't have enough grain to raise them. When the pigs grew, I sold them and got more cash. I also sold vegetable seeds in the town market. We had more land, enough labor, plus some sidelines, so our income increased.
Cooperatives grew at an astonishing speed. By the end of 1955, almost two-thirds of the peasants had joined. This was much faster than Mao had ever hoped. Seizing the momentum, he ordered the country to move to the next stage of socialism, to collectivization. But for most peasants, this was going too far. In collectives, private property was abolished. People had to give up their animals, their tools, and their land. Party officials put intense pressure on families to join.
By then, people were unhappy. They weren't comfortable forming a collective with the whole village. Some villagers didn't get on with others. My father was quite well off, so he didn't want to join either. I was a party official in the village. I told him if I weren't an official, I wouldn't insist he join. If you didn't join, you wouldn't look good in front of your neighbors. With my persuasion and the example of others, he gave in. But he joined with reluctance. His income was quite high. It went down after he joined, so he was unhappy.
Within months, all of China's 600 million peasants were working in huge collectives. For the first time in history, the farm output of the entire nation was under government control. The government decided how much grain the peasants could keep. The rest had to be sold at low prices to the state.
The grain ration for the peasants was very low, not enough. Plus, you had to obey the leadership. You had to fulfill the state quota. State first, then the people.
Peasants complained about the policies.
They said, we can't keep one extra ear of grain for ourselves. Do you think this is fair? I said, it's not fair. So I wrote to the provincial leadership. Things couldn't go on like this. No matter how much you grew, you still had to give it to the state. You couldn't eat it. The province sent people down to investigate. They saw things were just the way I said, but they couldn't solve it. It was a big problem.
Collectives did not make the peasants better off, nor did they increase production. Mao still had to find a way to finance his vision of an industrial China.
毛主席曾经这样说过：“你们年轻人是朝气蓬勃、正在兴旺时期，好像早晨8、9点钟的太阳，希望寄托在你们的身上。孩子们都是新的、更好的成绩，保证完成任务。”
The communists controlled most intellectual life. Plays and films had to follow strict guidelines. Mao saw that this control was stifling potentially useful new ideas. He was also disturbed by the emergence of a new elite in the party itself. In 1956, Mao decided to encourage constructive criticism of the party. He called for 100 flowers to bloom in the arts and 100 schools of thought to contend in science.
I was all for the slogan of letting 100 flowers bloom. We all felt that we had really started to have democracy. Soon, all the walls in Beijing University were covered with big posters. People expressed their points of view and asked the Communist Party for changes.
Yu Beijian called many high school teachers unqualified. Shang Dashi complained medical research was falling behind. More and more people criticized party corruption and inefficiency.
Committee members and leaders at all levels were criticized by ordinary people. They had quite a tough time. So they did not like 100 flowers. They felt as if they were punching bags. They were not happy.
Under pressure from the party, Mao reversed himself. In June 1957, he published an article calling the people who had spoken out enemies and rightists. Mao appointed Deng Xiaoping to lead the anti-rightist movement.
I was supposed to have committed 29 crimes. One was that I supported the policy of letting 100 flowers bloom. It was Mao Zedong himself who started the policy. How could it be a crime? But it was.
The rightists were denounced in front of their colleagues in struggle meetings. Professor Ge Peiqi was criticized in this meeting at the People's University in Beijing.
不可是没有一个党呀，相信党吗？党就是我们救星，怎么会党接完10万8千里？我相信你可能会党接近10万8千里吧？你不相信党吗？那么这党跟关系呢？这是我个人的感觉是吧？我觉得呢，就是在这个解放以后到现在呢，不与在解放以前那时候那么亲密，这是我的感觉是吧？那至于说那10万8千里啊，那些词啊都是这个用作为形容，很不恰当啊。就说一疏远，这是我到现在的一个这么一个感觉上，那感觉可能不对了是吧？你站在什么立场发的呀？你还是站在你人民教师、人民大学的讲师的立场发呀？你还是代表你过去少将的阶级立场发呀？你说的这些话，你是代表哪一个？
Ge Peiqi was my neighbor. He was already done for. That's what we called it. I saw his youngest child, who was about 5 or 6 months old. His nurse had quit. The baby was crawling outside the building under the burning sun. I felt sorry for him and picked him up. Some people said, "You shouldn't do that. Ge Pei-chi is a bad person. Why are you holding his child? You'll get into trouble." They meant well. I said, "The baby hasn't done anything wrong."
Ge Pei-chi's family was ostracized for years. Ge Pei-chi himself spent the next 2 decades doing hard labor.
I had been in the revolutionary ranks for so many years. At the meeting, I was the most senior person there, but I was finished. I suddenly realized that I had fallen from the sky down to the earth. I could never get up again. I was a rightist, and I was kicked out.
In an internal party document, Mao estimated that about 10% of the people were rightists. Local officials interpreted this to mean they had to find 10 rightists among every 100 people.
They accused my wife of telling my son to tell other children that their land and house were ours. It wasn't true. She never said anything like that. But when you were told to confess, you had to say something. They wouldn't let you go if you didn't. People at the meeting shouted, "Struggle against her. Hit her." She was just a peasant woman. She wasn't like me. I could make things up on the spot so I wouldn't get hurt. She couldn't do that. What could we do? Someone took her backstage. He said to her, "Just say anything. Say you were wrong in saying this or doing that." But my old woman was stupid. Her mind did not work fast. She was taught what to say. She walked onto the stage saying, "Okay, okay, I'll say that." But once she was there, she forgot everything. She was scared stiff. When she got home, she cried and cried. It was 1958, during the anti-rightist movement. It was the first time she was ever repudiated. But she was not labeled a rightist. She was not qualified. Not at all qualified.
Nearly 1 million people were condemned as rightists. They were sent to jail and prison camps or to work in the countryside. The anti-rightist campaign effectively silenced China's intellectuals. Mao had decided that they were no longer needed. Mao was also beginning to question China's relationship with the Soviet Union. When Nikita Khrushchev and Mao met in 1958, they kept up appearances of solidarity. But in private, they disagreed on major issues. During the visit, Mao did not tell Khrushchev that he was about to launch military action against his old enemy, the nationalists. When the communists took power in 1949, the defeated nationalist government fled to Taiwan, also called Formosa. Led by Chiang Kai-shek, they still claimed to be the true government of China, and they had American support.
The United States must remove any doubt regarding our readiness to fight, if necessary, to preserve the vital stake of the free world in a free Formosa.
The nationalists hoped one day to retake the mainland. Their troops trained on islands which lay just off China's coast. In August 1958, the communists began to shell them. President Eisenhower stood firm in his commitment to the nationalists. Mao did not want a war with the United States. After a few tense weeks, he stopped the bombardment. The crisis petered out, but it had lasting repercussions. While Khrushchev backed the Chinese communists in public, he was furious with Mao. The attack could have triggered a superpower war. In 1959, the two men met for the last time. A year later, they broke off relations. But foreign criticism did not sway Mao's government. They viewed conflict with the nationalists as a purely domestic matter. The same was true, they asserted, of their actions in Tibet. For centuries, this remote and religious land had been regarded by the Chinese as part of China. In 1950, the communists enforced their claim by taking over Tibet. In 1959, Tibetans rebelled. The People's Liberation Army crushed the revolt. As reports of atrocities and destruction reached the outside world, China's international isolation deepened. Mao's first concern was still China's economy. Industrial output had doubled in 5 years, but he was not satisfied.
Mao Zedong always hoped to build a socialist economy in China faster than the Soviet Union. He always thought fighting the Revolutionary War was very difficult. There must be a way to speed up agricultural or industrial production. Could it be more difficult than fighting a war?
In 1958, Mao launched his most ambitious campaign to date, the Great Leap Forward. His goal was to make China the industrial equal of Western nations in just 15 years. His method was to mobilize the entire country to work day and night by promising a better future.
We built reservoirs, planted cotton, cultivated trees, and things like that. When we worked, we had a slogan. Catch the stars and moon. We had to work when the stars and moon were out.
We had breakfast very early and came home very late. So we worked all day long. We were so enthusiastic. To make work exciting, flags flew high in the fields and loudspeakers squealed. People shouted slogans one after another.
Mao decided to visit some villages to see what was going on. I went with him. Once we came to a village and saw a banner with these words on it. People's communes are good. He read the words. People's communes are good. A reporter happened to be next to Mao and took down his words. The next day, the words appeared in the newspapers. That's how People's Commune started.
Mao's word was so powerful that almost overnight, people's communes sprang up across China. A commune encompassed many villages with thousands of families. Each day was strictly regimented, and family life was virtually abolished. Children were placed in communal nurseries while their parents worked around the clock. People ate in the fields or in communal dining halls. To increase industrial output, communes were ordered to make steel.
The slogan was to overtake England and catch up with America. The idea was that if everybody worked hard and everywhere in the country people refined steel, then we would catch up very soon.
People collected walks, pots, bed frames, and tools, anything made of iron or steel. They built small furnaces to melt them. The biggest challenge was to keep the furnaces fueled.
We burned tables, chairs, window frames. And finally, we even opened old coffins and used the wood. They really stank. We kept the fires burning day and night. And for convenience, we built work sheds close to the furnaces. One day I worked very late and I was totally exhausted. We had separate sheds for men and women. But I was so tired I couldn't tell the difference. I just walked into a shed, lay down, and fell asleep. When I woke the next morning, I found I was in the men's shed. Of course, it was all right. Nobody cared. All we cared about was making as much steel as we could.
At night, you could see many furnaces along the railroad. Fire shot out of the furnaces. This made people excited. China was going through a great change. China was becoming a very rich and strong country. All this seemed to have happened overnight. Mao was very pleased.
But the steel people made was useless.
We used it to make pots of all sizes. But when people heated them, they cracked and leaked. If only we had the equipment to make good steel, but we didn't. We only had people. Our methods were very primitive. Of course we didn't make good steel. People were unhappy, but nobody dared say anything. The result was that everything made of iron and steel was taken from every family and was made useless. We had no tools left to use.
While the government called on everyone to make steel, they also wanted to increase farm output.
How could we increase the grain harvest? People said that if you did close planting and used more fertilizer, you would definitely increase output. People got carried away. They were hot-headed. From Mao Zedong and the Central Party Committee down to leaders at all levels, everyone was full of enthusiasm.
During the Great Leap Forward, we believed miracles could happen. There was a saying, "The corn will grow higher the more you desire." Communes and schools reported their wonderful news to the party. If one commune said they could turn out 150 tons an acre, another one would say their target was 180 tons. Each commune or school would promise a higher amount until the last school gave their highest figure. Our school set the target of 470 tons an acre. We dug a hole, something like a swimming pool. We thought if we put all the fertilizer in it, we would achieve our target. Then we poured the seeds in, which built up into a layer about this thick. There was a photograph in the People's Daily that showed the wheat in a field supporting the weight of children.
Some leaders of the Central Party Committee were so happy that they put this photo on their desks at work. Most people believed it.
We were surprised to see that photo and wondered how it could be possible. But because we were city people, we couldn't be sure it was a fake.
When I went with Mao to the villages, I really did see so much grain in the fields, so much rice.
他的田上面种的那个粮食，那个稻子很多很多。
The yields were so high.
大很大，所以我当
At
时
the time, I thought everything was true.
真的不是假的。
After the anti-rightist campaign, few dared to ask questions.
只有一个老师
Only one teacher spoke out.
16万斤都盛产。
How thick would the wheat be if we did produce 470 tons?
结果马上大家就说
Immediately, he was accused of being a rightist and not believing in the party.
到后来可是呢
Later, I learned it was all fake.
是假的了。
The peasants were putting on a show for us.
他把
They moved grain from other places and put it all in one field. It was all a show for Mao.
Under pressure to produce more, to launch satellites to heaven, as it was called, party officials inflated production figures. An ominous cycle began as the state took more and more grain based on false figures, leaving the peasants with nothing to eat.
For example, the output was 5 tons of grain, but 10 tons were reported. Then the state would collect grain based on 10 tons.
Our commune committee calculated that our yield was 1,800 pounds an acre. It didn't qualify us to go up to heaven. But the deputy had an idea. He added the melons, fruits, pears, peaches, turnips, and vegetables to the grain, counting them as grain output. So the yield became 2,600 pounds per acre. Now we were qualified to go up to heaven. The commune committee did not want to calculate this way. It was cheating. But those people were higher up. What could we do? I have this problem. I get emotional very easily. I wondered why, the higher the official, the more he dared to lie, to deceive the party and the people. Zhang Hongbin, the financial secretary, was horrified when he heard such an enormous figure. He said, "Are you letting people eat? This is sheer absurdity."
Party officials ignored the protests and continued to submit the inflated figures. The state took the grain accordingly. It was sent to feed the cities, repay Soviet debts, or left to rot in warehouses. Peasants across China were beginning to starve.
Anhui was one of the 4 provinces worst hit. All my mother could do was gather weeds with my aunt. There wasn't enough grain, so we ate weeds.
By the summer of 1959, the leaders knew the Great Leap Forward was going badly wrong.
Mao decided to go back to Shaoshan, his hometown, to have a look. He wanted to find out the truth. He wanted people to speak freely. I think that when he was in Shaoshan, he found that there really were problems in the Great Leap Forward.
After his trip, Mao decided to moderate production targets. In July 1959, the party met at the mountain resort of Lushan to set new, realistic goals. Minister of Defense Peng Dehuai, the hero of the Korean War, was one of Mao's oldest revolutionary comrades.
For my generation of officials, Peng Dehuai was a very down-to-earth peasant and an excellent combat general. He hated fraud and hypocrisy. He said what was on his mind. Back in the early days, if he needed to talk to Mao and saw that Mao was still in bed, he would go and pull off his quilt, saying, "Get up, let's talk." He said, but now it's very difficult to have that kind of relationship. He's the chairman. It's so hard to see him, let alone discuss things with him.
Peng wrote to Mao describing what he saw as the problems of the Great Leap Forward. What Peng intended as loyal criticism, Mao saw as political treachery.
When Mao Zedong started the meeting, he said he had not slept all night. He couldn't sleep, even after he took his sleeping pills. He just got up and called this meeting. He was very serious. You could see that at times he was very angry. He said, "It's all right for you to oppose me. When I have no alternative, I'll just take the Liberation Army, go up to the mountains, and carry out guerrilla warfare." Finally, the resolution was that Peng Dehuai was against the Communist Party. When Mao left the room, I was following him. Peng was in front of us. Mao called him. "Marshal Peng, if there are any questions, we can talk." Peng swung his arm and said, "What's there to talk about? There's nothing more to say."
Zhou Enlai and Liu Shaoqi agreed with Peng, but even they did not dare speak out.
Nobody had the courage to oppose Mao Zedong. He was considered absolutely correct. He stood high and looked far. People thought they were not up to Mao's level. Even if someone wanted to make a comment, he would not dare say anything or reveal his own feelings.
As a result, production goals were not cut. Officials continued to demand more grain than the peasants could give. The Great Leap Forward continued through 1960. Millions of peasants were starving.
Old peasants said in a fury, "No, grain comes from the blood and sweat of peasants. It doesn't grow on the backs of intellectuals. Who do they think they're fooling?" In wartime, we protected them and saved their lives. Now we provide them with food and clothing. They have full stomachs, and still they come to cheat us. Don't they have a conscience?
My aunt's family was a typical big family in the countryside, with several generations living together. There were 36 people altogether. During the 3 years of famine, one died after another. Eventually, only 3 people were left alive. At first, when someone died, they would take the body and bury it. Later, they didn't have the strength to take the bodies out. They could only look at them. They watched the bodies being eaten by rats and their eyeballs dug out. People didn't even have the strength to chase the rats away.
The famine was very severe and widespread, but newspapers did not report it at all. People only knew that their local area was suffering. To keep the news from spreading, peasants were not allowed to leave their areas, even to beg.
At first, peasants ate everything they had at home. Then they ate Genyan earth. It's a kind of white clay. There's a legend in the village, passed down from generation to generation. It says that this clay was provided by Old Mother Genyan, who sympathized with the poor people. People would eat it during the famine because it was very fine. But still, it was hard to swallow. At first, the peasants could swallow a little. But after 4 or 5 days, it destroyed their intestines, and they died. After eating all the grass roots and tree bark, they ate the earth.
The famine lasted 3 years. An estimated 30 million people died. Mao's revolution, fought to give the Chinese people a better life, had helped create the largest famine in history. In 1961, Peng Dehuai, a lone voice, wrote, "Grain scattered across the ground. Potato leaves withered. Strong young people have gone to make steel. Only children and old women reap the crops. How will they eat next year? Please, think of the people."
A campaign called Remember the Bitter Past and Think of the Sweet Present was launched. The peasants were told, Chairman Mao and the party want you to talk about your suffering before 1949, so that young people will realize what a happy life they have now, and how they owe all this to the party and Chairman Mao. The peasants started to talk about the bitter past. Then they forgot that they were supposed to be talking about the old society before 1949. They got carried away and talked about the famine of the last 3 years. They cried and cried. The officials were scared to death. It was as if the peasants were blaming the Communist Party and Chairman Mao. They said, "Grandma Zhang, Grandpa, you can't talk like this." The peasant said, "Why not? So many in our families died. Never, ever have we had such a terrible time."
In China, between 1959 and 1961, an estimated 30 million people died of hunger. Officially, the communist government blamed the catastrophe on floods and drought. But in party meetings, they admitted that the famine was largely created by their own policies. Their efforts to rebuild the country would spark a struggle inside the party. A struggle that would engulf the Chinese people in chaos and terror. Mao Zedong was the head of the Communist Party, the man who had instigated the disastrous policies of the Great Leap Forward. But no one would ever dare hold him responsible. Mao's reputation remained untarnished. During this time, Mao had chosen to withdraw from day-to-day government. Liu Shaoqi took over.
Although people respected Liu Shaoqi, and he had great authority, he could not compare with Mao. I remember after Mao resigned as head of state, the People's Congress elected Liu Shaoqi to succeed him. We had parades to celebrate. But people shouted, "Long live Chairman Mao." Not a single person shouted, "Long live Chairman Liu."
Liu was a veteran revolutionary and one of the most conscientious and talented in the party. He worked with Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping to rebuild the country. They had to do it without foreign help. China's communist government had long viewed America as its principal enemy. Now, as U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War escalated, so did anti-American rhetoric. Relations with the Soviet Union were no better. In the 1950s, Soviet experts had helped build Chinese industry. But by the end of the decade, disagreements between Mao and Nikita Khrushchev reached breaking point. Soviet experts shredded their blueprints and returned home. Now, Liu shifted economic focus from developing heavy industry to making consumer goods. He relaxed controls on the peasants. They remained in communes, but they were allowed to make money farming on the side. China's recovery was fast. People who had worked day and night were given time off. The early 1960s were quiet years for Mao. He studied political economy. He read the Chinese classics of warfare and romance.
Later, there were more dance parties. Before, they were once a week on Saturday. Then they were increased to twice a week on Wednesday and Saturday. There was another big change. Another room was set up by the ballroom. Sometimes, during the party, Mao took young girls into this room to rest with him. He would rest for an hour or so. I think Mao got great pleasure from these parties.
By 1963, Mao had tired of political seclusion. At 70, he still dreamed of realizing a communist utopia. He began to plan the final and most revolutionary act of his political career. Minister of Defense Lin Biao became his strongest ally. In 1964, Lin published a pocket-sized book called Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. First, it was distributed throughout the army, then in work units and schools across the country.
We were educated to love the party, our country, and our leader. Even if we didn't understand his words, we deeply believed that he was always right. As long as we did what Mao said, we were doing the right thing.
My teachers taught me that Chairman Mao was the great savior of China, and he brought liberation to China. This idea was stamped in my mind and ran through my blood.